professor here at the Harvard School of Public Health for more than 15 years. I joined the cancer biology department here at a very critical time when HIV was just emerging. And I had the great fortune to work with Professor Max Essex, a very close collaborator. Our laboratories were very closely together. We shared students back and forth. And as you know, and some of his work has been referred to in Botswana, has gone on. In those days, I was less interested in the public health issues of the Harvard School of Public Health, but over time, I have become closer, much closer, to some of the core issues that motivate this department, and I've had, over the years, the great pleasure of interacting with a number of my former colleagues, including the distinguished Jim Kim, who was here as a professor, went on to be president of Dartmouth, and now, of course, has a most distinguished position in influencing public health. I was asked to speak today about the issues of aging and demographic change in the world and the implications. That's a topic that over time I have come to appreciate and motivates a great deal of the work of the foundation I now chair, Access Health International. Demographic change is a defining issue of our time. It is occurring globally. It's a massive social change. It's going to influence almost every aspect of our life. Our economic life, our political life, the way we organize our societies, and of course, our health. I've just published a book called Aging with Dignity. It's a specific study of how Sweden is coping with demographic change. The first chapter of that book, Aging with Dignity, outlines demographic change not only in Sweden, but around the world, and points out how big that change is globally. We're all familiar with the outlines of that change. The first change is that people are living longer. And as the decades go by, the average lifespan in most parts of the world, including many places that would surprise you, is extended. And the number of people who are living over 100 is growing very rapidly in China, in the United States, in Europe, in South America, and in many other countries. That's accompanied by another major demographic change, which is the plummeting birth rates in many countries. Certainly that's true in China. It's true throughout most of the Eurasian landmass, and in some cases it's absolutely stunning. If you look at the former Soviet Union, you find birth rates which are well below 1. You find in Europe very few exceptions for birth rates that are at the replacement rate. Were it not for immigration in the United States, our birth rate would be below replacement rate. We know in the Pacific Rim, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, the birth rates are well below replacement rates. And it seems to me to be one of the most astounding discoveries of human biology, that given certain socioeconomic conditions, the human race has opted not to replace itself. What a major change from the way we used to think about demography. I remember as a young man thinking about the overpopulation of our planet. It was a dominant theme in population councils around the world. What are we going to do with its ever-burgeoning population. It is not that massive population is going to disappear overnight. It will not. We will be left with very large populations in India and China. And in fact, the Indian population is still growing. The Mexican population is still growing. The one part of the world which is exceptional in terms of its birth rate is Africa. The whole sub-Saharan Africa is growing at a phenomenal rate, rates that were familiar to us from the 1950s. But that's the exception in the world, and how long that exception will maintain, I think, is an interesting question. But you have these two dynamics. And let me add a third dynamic, which most people don't really talk about, the dynamic in Russia and Central Asia, where not only do you have a declining population, but you have a population where the lifespan is dropping, and massive migration out of those areas. For Central Asia, Soviet Union, or the former Soviet Union, and Russia, Eastern Europe, you have a massive migration out of those. So you have a superpopulation rate, low birth rate, dropping age of longevity, the dropping longevity, plus massive migration. So these are huge social changes. As you travel around the world, these social changes are beginning to be apparent. I've recently had the great privilege of traveling with my wife through many parts of Japan. I actually lived in Japan as a visiting professor a number of years ago. And you would walk down the Ginza and it would be bustling with life. There's probably no place in the world except Times Square that was as active as the Ginza in those days. Walk down the Ginza today. It's a very different experience. Go to the Chiba Peninsula. It's almost like a ghost town. Go down to the southern islands and you see massive infrastructure with very few people. Drive around the countryside at night and you see very few lights on in people's houses because they aren't there. It's a tremendous change and a shock. You know, I'm old enough to have gone to Japan in 1960 and looked at the aftermath of World War II. Tokyo is not the Tokyo you see today. I watched, as I visited quite often, I would say on almost a yearly basis, this transformation of that city from vast swaths of rubble and unbuilt areas to this marvelous city, this huge metropolitan area it is today. But I'm now watching another transformation, a transformation of depopulation. And that has really profound effects on the economy, the GDP. The economists I've talked to say at least 1.5% or perhaps more. The GDP problem of Japan is demographics. And that is a number that is likely to affect many other countries as well. And it's not just Japan. Italy is the same problem. A lot of the political problems that we see are demographically driven. Look at the problems of migration in Europe that are affecting the economy and the politics of that country, of that region. You have massive influx from Turkey, from North Africa, and other places that are fundamentally changing the demographics of that broad geographical area. If you go, and I was just in Berlin, to some parts of Berlin, you don't speak German, you speak Turkish. The whole areas of Kreuzberg and other areas are not German. You go to the periphery of Paris, it's not French, it's Arabic that is spoken there. These are really big changes. There are a number of historians, and I follow some of these, that believe that demography is fate. Demography drives history. It has been in the past an interesting area of study, and it's becoming one of the more interesting areas of study today. What will be the fate, for example, of major regions of the world like Central Asia? Who's going to be there? Who are going to be in Europe? Do I have 5 minutes? I think I have a number more. I have 5 minutes more? One lady? Is that correct? Okay. Is that true? I was planning to speak for longer. Okay, I'll take some more time, more than 5 minutes. Don't show me any more time. I'll be reasonably short. Sorry for the interruption. We've had a number of changes in the program this morning. So these are major implications for economies around the world, this demographic pressure. How does that impact us, those of us who are interested in health? Well, my foundation looks around the world at health issues. We look at health finance, we look at health